Hello and welcome to my latest video. This is going to be a video where I'm painting the Keeper of Secrets head. As you can see up on screen at the moment, these are the colours that I used. So there's scale colour violet, that is model colour dark sea blue, scale colour Cantabric blue, and then Bugman's glow. The white I'm using is Schminker titanium white. It's one of the Pro Acryl paints that come in a tube, but any white will do. It's just this is my preferred white. It's quite nice when you water it down. It goes on rather smooth. You will see that the model has already had like a quick airbrush, and basically all I did here is I sprayed the whole thing blue, Cantabric blue, and then just sprayed it from the top with Bugman's glow. But it's not very obvious, and we're actually going to be painting over a lot of the Bugman's glow anyway, and kind of fading it in a little bit more, as you can see here. So you can get away with just like priming it and base coating it at Cantabric blue. So the idea behind this is to try to bring in a couple of different colours to the whole model. The whole model is going to have this kind of pink to blue fade across it. This is a commission actually, and I painted a Demonette a long time ago with this colour scheme, and the person who wants the Keeper of Secrets really liked the colour scheme, so he's bought this for his wife, which is rather cool. I asked him if it was okay if I recorded it for Patreon, and he said yes. So here we go. So we have, as you can see up on the wet palette, we do have the violet, the dark sea blue, the Cantabric blue, and the Bugman's glow, and then you'll see between the white and the Bugman's glow we've got like a little bit of a half and half mix, a little bit brighter there. So working through this Bugman's glow, they're all watered down about 1:1, because we want to be working with slightly thinner glazes so that we can start pulling paint in areas where we want it to be a little bit lighter. I am just missing the focus at the moment. Hopefully I will back up a second in a little bit. But we're working on some of the light volumes at the moment, starting up on the cheeks and the nose. They're the two easy ones to start off with, and now we're dropping down onto the lower jaw. So again, these are they're going to look slightly harsh, but we're going to kind of glaze those together a little bit in a second. We're trying to work in some lines to start introducing a bit of texture onto the model as well. There we go, and take it out of focus again. So there's quite a few parts to this model that, or to this head that you're not entirely sure what they are. So there's like a couple of eyebrows that are just above the eyes, I think. I couldn't quite decide what colour to paint those. Eventually, I have painted them the same kind of flesh tone, the flesh colour. That might change as we get further into the project. I don't know. We might change it to a little bit darker for a bit more contrast against the decorative head dress that she's wearing. But ultimately, we're just kind of sketching out some of the highlight areas now with this thinned down Bugman's glow, and you can see every time I go back to the palette I'm just kind of pulling it out of the pool as well, and allowing a little bit more of the water from the wet palette to soak into it. The lighting direction on this, I want to have quite a soft but definite highlight and light source from the right hand side. So the right of the model is going to be a little bit brighter than the left hand side of the model. The left hand side we're going to have a little bit more of that kind of cool blue shadow, which we're going to start using a little bit of the purple in there as well to start introducing some warmth almost to the shadows. Yeah, so you can see things like the nose here. We're only kind of highlighting down half the side of it, and leaving the other half to have that nice fade that we've already got on the model. You can just do that with a glaze if you need to, if you haven't got access to an airbrush. but it was like I say, we're kind of painting over it all anyway. So we're watering down a little bit of this Cantabric blue, mixing in a tiny little bit of the Bugman's Glow to make a half and half. So this is why the airbrush, the zenithal airbrush, is not really that important, because we are kind of painting over everything that's on there. But just kind of building up this kind of half and half now. It was quite an interesting one. I wanted to try to see where the light was going to actually hit on the cheeks and things, and how harsh that line was going to be. So in some senses it's easier, but obviously now you guys have this video so that you can see where the lighting needs to be. So pulling this shadow in from the side of the nose. Again, that's going to be quite a strong shadow, because it's on the shadow side of the head, if you like, and just kind of fading this Bugman's Glow in down here. So we're always trying to keep a reasonably soft brush. This isn't a brand new brush. We're playing with a little bit of playing around with a little bit of the tip. So we're kind of scratching the same as you would have seen on the Necron Lord video, when we were doing the scratching texture on the hammer. So we are kind of scratching and scrubbing. I've said that word again. That's we need to invent that word. That's copyright Chris Frossin. Scrubbing the paint on with the brush, but allowing the tip to kind of almost go where it wants a little bit. If you're pulling the tip and pulling the brush in one direction, the tip is going to generally follow that, and then if you push it a little bit like this, then it's going to get a little bit of random and structure to it as well. So I was really pleased with the end of this. As we kind of get on, we're going to try to push the contrast a little bit more. I think we're going to start doing that now. Yep, there's a little bit of white coming in here, so we're going to try and start pushing this contrast up a tiny bit, allowing that highlight to drift across the nose just a little bit, and then working on just some details and some fine detail lines to start pushing that contrast and adding a little bit of detail to the face as well. After all, the face is always going to be the focal point of the model. Particularly this model, it's quite a large model, so we want to have the paint job on the model drawing the eye up to the head, and then the head, obviously, it has to be with pretty much the same as the Necron Lord we did last time. The head is going to have to be nicely detailed with some good fine detail on there to hold the focus. Once your eye has been guided up to it, we do that with a few different ways. The model itself is going to have quite dark extremities, so the blue is going to be quite dark on the outsides, and then the centre of the model and then up towards the head is going to be a little bit pinker, a bit more pink, using this Bugman's Glow to focus where the eye is going to rest, and then of course you can then go and explore the rest of the model. So we're going to have some detail around the rest of the model as well, but the head's got to be it's got to look rather cool. So ticking some of these highlights. So there's a little bit of wet blending that goes on here, so just pulling in a little bit of that 50-50 mix to blend into the bottom and to soften those harsh transitions a little bit. And then, because we're kind of wet blending on here and the paints are quite wet, once I've blended those points on the first time, I've then got a little bit of a less stark white mix on my brush, so I can then go in and start softening some of the areas like this down with a bit of a softer mix. It's a little bit like using a loaded brush. A loaded brush is having the back of the brush filled with one colour and then the front of the brush, but because we're not really washing the brush between applications here, we can do a kind of a small version of the loaded brush as we get on. So now we're going to start introducing a little bit of a purple glaze on some of these areas. So scale color is not it's not the best for glazing. It's absolutely fine. You could also, if you don't have the scale color paints, you could also use game color hexed lichen, and then there's the Games Workshop. What's the color? I'm trying to find there's a purple Games Workshop equivalent. I think it says Xenos purple or something. There it is. There's Screamer pink, which you could use. Games Workshop paints are great at glazing, so you could also use one of these. But yeah, there's the Hex Lichen from Game Color, and then there's those couple of Games Workshop paints if you want to use something different, or you don't have access to the scale color range. So again, just mixing up a little bit of a variation of glazes here so that we can soften some of these transitions down. Again, I've got a little bit too much paint on the brush there. Always make sure when you're glazing, particularly when you're glazing small areas like this, you really don't want to flood the model. So get that glaze off the brush as quickly as you can, so that you're not flooding it. It wants to be drying quite quickly. Glazing is really good if you can get it to dry very quickly, so you don't want to have that much on your brush anyway. And if you can get it to dry very quickly, then you can just build up the layers incredibly quickly anyway, so you don't need to flood the area. And then on this side, we're going to start introducing, or trying to start introducing, a little bit of Bugman's Glow into some of the highlight areas, just with this glaze again. You can see how the airbrush highlight that I used on this has really only just been a guide. We're pretty much painting over absolutely everything on it, trying to introduce some contours to the face on this side, working on that Bugman's Glow to pull the highlights up a little bit, and to give the face a little bit of shape as well. Now you'll notice I just went in for the mid-tone again there, but I've got a very small amount on my brush. The brush is still quite wet from the glazes, so if you have a wet brush from glazes, you can then dip in quite quickly and quite easily to get that like next transition. This is quite interesting, trying to figure out what that actually is, what the little goatee beard sort of thing is. Is it horns or is it hair? I'm not entirely sure. We'll figure it out at some point. I paint it a little bit as if it's hair. We try to add a little bit of texture in there as well. Now highlighting down that side of the mouth, if I don't highlight down that side of the mouth, then I lose some of the shape and the definition of the mouth, so that's quite important to highlight all the way down and around that mouth. I'm sorry, this is drifting off a little bit, guys. This is it's such a small head. I mean, it's not like Space Marine size head, but it's such a small head. It's proving quite difficult to keep in frame. So adding a little bit of texture on here now. Look, so we're just kind of adding an impression that it has some texture, either hair or maybe the growth lines on horns. But those little lines down there just add a bit of a detail for that. And then we can soften those down. So exactly the same as we've been talking about before. If you do want them to be softer, you can glaze all these back as much as you like. Pretty much, you can go all the way to really smooth, just by thinning down and glazing and keeping glazing. So this side of the head, I pretty much build up all the highlights on this side of the head with glazes, to try to keep it soft, because obviously this side, because the light is the light source is coming in from the opposite side. This side is all going to be lit by bounce light, so it's going to have a lot more kind of diffused light. It's going to be it's going to have light that's bouncing around the room or whatever, bouncing off walls, reflecting off the side of her horns and things like that. So it's going to be a lot softer. Whereas the right side of the face, as you look at it, is going to have so camera right if you're a photographer, which is why all my models are camera right lit. It's just the way that I've always lit things with photography as well, so it's carried across, if you like. So the camera right, that part that I'm painting there, that's going to be a lot harsher. You're almost going to have a little bit more contrast on that side, and then the side away from the light is going to be a lot softer. So you won't see as many white highlights on the left hand side of the face. That's going to be, like I say, we're kind of building it all up in glazes to try and keep it soft, but we're also not going to take the highlights right up to bright either. Okay, so this purple glaze that I'm putting on here is to bring a little bit of contours and details into the shadows, a little bit of colour differentiation into the shadows as well, trying to pull the purple up into the very depths of the blue and around things like the eye sockets and the ears and things. So it's lots of oh dear. I thought I'd sorted this out. I'm going to have to pay much more attention to this. So adding that white dot. Again, this is kind of wet blending again, adding that white dot on the end, and you're then seeing me kind of drag the highlights across. That first white dot obviously watered down the white on the brush, and allowed it to get softer and softer and softer as I carried on painting, because the brush has already got a bit of pink in it anyway. And a very, very watered down pink, so it flows into the white quite quickly. So you can, like I say, it's a little bit like a loaded brush technique, but not quite as aggressive. We're doing it on a smaller area, and then the same down here. We're using the pressure of the brush to mix the paint on the model. So the light volume on the eyebrow, we've kind of added that highlight, the edge highlight on the edge of the eyebrow, but now we've got to put that light volume next to it to almost justify that light highlight there. The highlight is always going to be there, but we can't just have a highlight. It's not a sharp edge, if you like. So we've got to soften all of these transitions down a little bit, particularly on the left hand side, but also you can't really have a highlight on an organic face like this without having a bit of a light volume leading up to it. So now kind of watering down a little bit of dark sea blue, and just edging in some of the eye, so that we've got some contrast underneath the eyelids. And then these eyes, I was trying to decide which direction to go with these eyes. I might still change them. At the moment they are going to be a dark blue. I might get an Abaddon black or a Corvus black glaze and glaze them down a little bit and then add the highlight back in. I'm not quite sure yet. I'm not sure that that they stand out enough as being blue. So we're adding this blue in here. So this is Cantabric blue that we're adding in, and then we just kind of pull a white mix out of the blue and kind of fade it out up to the top. So we put a little bit of white out there, mix it on the brush with the Cantabric blue that's already there, and then highlight up the orb of the eye. This is one of those occasions where you wished you hadn't glued the head decorations on, because it's particularly difficult to try to get in there, and the angle which you have to drop the brush in at, you could quite easily catch the lower eyelid. So just be careful when you're applying that. But yeah, the blue looks okay on the photograph here and on the video as I'm painting it. But yeah, I just wonder whether it could be a little bit more demonic if it was a darker black, and then we can paint it as a little bit more of a highlight as well. So we've got the highlight here is coming down to the bottom of the eye, and then we add a white dot on the top to show that it's a little bit shiny. So softening down a lot of these little highlight lines that we've been doing, glazing over them towards where we want the highlight to finish. And this is another little loaded brush, trying to pull some detail into here. I realise that whatever it is, the line to the blue is probably a little bit strong, so I drag over the transition a little bit there to try to add some texture into the blue. And it's when I'm painting a face like this, when you have the colour on the brush, you can kind of flit around. As you can see, you can flit around and add where you think the same colour should be. So similar colours on part of the face. We can obviously that's one of the reasons why I'm flitting around and going over to the other side of the model, because I've got a colour that's mixed on the brush, that has worked on one side, and okay, well that's not quite as harsh a highlight now, so I can come onto the other side and pull that in to like the top of the cheeks there. So that's a much less harsh Bugman's glow because of the mix that I've been doing, and it's softened down a little bit. There's that little highlight on the inside of the mouth, on the back of the lips. And glazing again, just trying to pull a little bit higher up on that shadow line. I want the cheeks to be particularly kind of prominent on this. She has got quite a prominent cheek line on that, so I want to keep that shadow underneath the cheek as prominent and as obvious as I can, particularly into that blue. I want to try and keep that blue into the face at some point, and that also just helps sell the contour that's been sculpted on the face. So we're going to go back in. This is highlighting the eyes. So we've just pulled the Cantabric blue, pulled a little bit of white in, and pull this highlight up towards the front. where the particularly on this side where the light source is coming from, so the front of the eye is going to be catching as much light as it can. So I'm almost imagining these as clear blue orbs rather than having pupils, which is, yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of a step too far away from being a recognisable eye. I think because I put these little white dots in here, I think it looks a bit too much like it's got a pupil and an iris, rather than it being a blue orb that's got highlights in there. So that's one of the reasons why I'm tempted to darken it down and take it black, because everybody knows of a black demonic eye, but a blue demonic one maybe not so much. Again, so we've added that white dot. Now we've got a little bit of a 50-50 mix, and we're painting around the white dot to create that transition. And you can see it just kind of softens in now. So because it's a little bit softer, I suppose it doesn't really look as much like a pupil. And looking at the model in my hand now, it doesn't look too bad. So it might stay. It's going to be something that I'll address in the future. And now some dark sea blue, glaze that right down, just so that we've got a bit of a darker line around the eye to separate it out, and to give the lower lid a bit of shape. And you can really see the contours coming in when we're looking at it from underneath, keeping those blues and the purples, and my thumb in the way. But keeping those blues and purples in the shadows really helps sell the shape of the face. This is quite a limited palette, if you like. You could get away with not using the dark sea blue if you wanted, and kind of mix a little bit of Cantabric with the purple. But I just found the dark sea blue is just a little bit of a darker, more natural transition between the Bugman's Glow and the Cantabric. If you look where the airbrush has kind of faded a bit of the Bugman's Glow and the Cantabric blue together, it looks a bit dark sea bluish. So that's why that colour is on the palette. So you can kind of glaze those two colours together when you do get a harsher line, harsher highlight transition. So just pulling some of these highlights up a little bit further on this side now, but keeping them soft. You can see how soft the transitions are on this side compared to the other side. So again, the other side is going all the way up to white. Trying to add a little bit of texture to the nose. If you imagine a cow's nose or a horse's nose, they've got a little bit of texture coming down, some wrinkles and things. So we're always trying to just suggest the texture on these, rather than it's very small to paint on a crease, but you can suggest it with some brush marks. So where we're dragging the paint across. Any organic thing like this will in my opinion anyway, it will really benefit from some brush mark texture. If you keep the paint thin, so remember this is all the paints there are at least 1:1 paint to water. So if you keep the paint thin, then you're not going to get any kind of 3D marks on there. You're going to have some nice soft texture, which is adding to the model rather than a 3D texture which is taking away from it. As soon as you get 3D texture of a paint mark on a model, you start introducing somewhere where the light can actually catch and show up the brush marks. So you want to try to get away from that as much as you can. Keep the paint thin, and then you can build it up in layers like this. You see that bottom jewel getting really kind of quite bright now. compared to how it was earlier. Got that white being pulled in, it's going a little bit higher up into the cheek, and that nice cheek line there is getting quite nice and soft as a transition as it curls around the cheek. But yeah, this is just glazing a lot of the softer light volumes together, particularly on the nose there. We want to try and keep that as soft as we can. Another way of keeping it soft is, of course, keeping it out of focus, so sorry about that, guys. There we go. Tiny little bit of white now. Again, the Bugman's Glow Glaze is still on the paintbrush. Get a little bit of white. You saw me kind of mix it in the tip a little bit on the wet palette, and that softens the white down straight away. And I've just done it again on my thumb, just to kind of mix it on the brush a little bit further. There we go. I'm really getting some progress. And this is really just going back and forth between the colours that we want to pull up and then pull down. A lot of my friends would start with a base tone and then put a wash on. I tend to like to work up from a dark tone, and add the highlights in, and leave the shadows there. If I do accidentally kind of make a mistake and drift over some of the shadow lines, I can add them back in again with a darker colour. But if you do it this way, then you're in complete control of where all the paint goes, particularly when you're painting like a high tabletop standard, display standard model like this is going to be. If I add a wash, washes are great for getting kind of a quick idea. In the same way as contrast paints are really good for sketching out an initial highlight, and showing you the texture on the model that you need to then paint in afterwards. So it's a great kind of starting point. I just like painting upwards from a dark shadow, and then glazing any transitions that are a little bit harsher together like this. So that's a great shot, actually showing how much brighter the left hand side of the face is, and also it's got a little bit of a reflection of a blue on that bottom of the cheek. Ooh, got a bit of something on the brush there. We'll get rid of that. I don't know what that was. Just refreshing the highlights now, because we've been glazing over these quite a lot. Some of the more extreme highlights have drifted away from the bright white. So this is just some pure titanium white, which we're going to add in. It's really important that you try and keep these white highlights as thin as you can. So get the cleanest brush that you can. I'm almost using this brush like a chisel. So it's got a very sharp edge to it as opposed to a sharp point. I could have used a brandy brush on this to get a bit of a sharper point on some of the areas, but of course we're trying to keep the texture and the organic feel around a lot of this. Just wiping off a little bit of my brush there. I picked up some of the purple to introduce a little bit of colour variation to some of the shadow areas like this. So just kind of stippling this on as a glaze. But the brush was very wet when I brought it to the model, so just wiped it off a little bit on the palette before we carried on. And then we're going to do exactly the same with some dark sea blue as well, just to introduce a little bit of colour variation into some of the shadow areas. Darken down. and the colour variations will help. I mean, it's a very large model, and there's a lot of colours that are going to be on it. So we have the blue, the Cantabric blue. We have the Bugman's Glow. We've also got some red in parts of the robe which is going on it. We've got some purple on the parts of the robe. So I'm trying to pull as many different kind of colour variations to keep the face interesting. And then just softening some of these transitions down even further with some more glazes as well. Now that jawline is could be quite a harsh line. I opted to kind of soften it in a little bit there, just with this purple glaze. The purple glaze is quite a bright glaze. So just softening that jawline in will help a little bit. Again, just a little bit of colour variation on there, adding a little bit of white for a loaded brush and dragging that highlight across. And of course, not forgetting the underside of the ear as well. The underside of the ear is going to be catching that highlight a little bit. But because of the way I'm doing this with a loaded brush, this is not a pure white highlight, so it's not looking as bright as the other side. That's softening down that centre again, just keeping the texture by dragging down. So softening that underside of the odd beard horn thing that it's got, and adding a few little dots here. Again, this is just kind of looking for texture, so we're adding a few pure white dots to suggest that there's some texture going on in this on that nose and on some certain areas on the face. A little bit of specular interest on the cheeks. Obviously faces have got all kind of different pores and spots and things, so different skin textures and colours. So again, just hinting at the fact that there's some texture on here. Adding that white dot back into the centre of the eye, because we've been glazing that back a fair bit. So that's now softened off. So adding the nice white dot straight back in again, and glazing a little bit of purple into the backside of the eye to give it a little bit of contour and shape. So darkening down the back corner of the eyeball. So this is where the dark sea blue is really an interesting colour, because it's got so many different kind of tones within it itself. It's got some blue and it's got some green within it, so it's a really good little interesting glaze for models like this when you have got this transition. Just glazing a little bit into the mouth as well to keep that definition before we do some teeth. So I think this is the teeth colour that we're kind of mixing in now. So trying to get a dark sea blue, a pale dark sea blue tone, which we can paint the teeth in, keeping this tip nice and sharp. Come on, have this bit in focus, please. There we go. So these teeth are quite interesting because the sculpt actually carries on going into the mouth as well. So the teeth continue, as you can see here. I'm painting the line that goes inside the mouth. The teeth that's just the way the caster's worked, but it kind of does help bring them forwards if you do that, and then you can just paint the dots to highlight the front of them, and and then we can get some pure white to come back in again. Again, just pulling it out so that it's mixed on and it's a little bit less harsh, and then we can dot the front of each. Dearie me, out of focus, Chris. Dot the front of each tooth. So be careful when you're doing this. Obviously, it's a very, very small part, but just be very deliberate. If you're not 100% committed to exactly where you're going to put the brush, then you are going to make a mistake on this. So just hold the brush very, very still and be very deliberate where you're trying to place it. I know it sounds obvious, but everybody has a lot more control over the brush tip than they think they have. I think a lot of painting is occasionally rather rushed. So just take things like that. The details like the like teeth are a little bit of an annoyance sometimes. Necron teeth are an absolute nightmare because there's not enough there never feels like there's enough definition in teeth on the Necron side. I always make a mistake on there, and it's very difficult to get back because of the size and the lack of definition on a Necron teeth. But these teeth are pretty good. Just go in nice and slowly and gently with the tip of the brush. Don't overcommit. If you overcommit, that's when you're going to be missing, and the paint is going to be blobbing on the inside of the teeth. So that's the biggest kind of tip. Don't have the paint too thin as well, and don't have it overloaded, and you will be absolutely fine. Final little bit, so just going to going in with a little bit of pure white again, just adding some texture. And that suggestion of what might be happening on that. There we go. So the finished face. We're going to come back. The next video is going to be a little bit shorter. We're going to work on the headdress, and that one will be coming very, very soon. So I hope you enjoyed this one, guys. Thank you very much, and we'll come back and we'll continue this face in the next video. Take care, everybody, and stay safe. Thank you very much. Bye bye.